Okay, so we are nearing the end of the first major assignment of the semester. Of course, that's paper one. Many of you, I'm willing to bet, have been with me for the first two installments of this Frederick Douglass breakdown, finding important passages, linking them to some of the things that we've been talking about in class. And I really do hope that this exercise has been helpful. So, in any case, this is going to be the third and final installment of the Frederick Douglass analysis. And so the central claim in My Bondage and My Freedom is that slavery is a system that victimizes everybody. It victimizes the slave. It even victimizes the slave owner, as we found out the last time. And the last group that Douglass is going to touch upon in this autobiography is non-slave owning white people. Now, another way to call this group, another way to refer to this group would be working class white people. Now, these are individuals that, at least on the surface level, don't seem to have any connection, any sort of real meaningful connection to the institution of slavery. However, Douglass is going to point out something that might be flying just right underneath the radar. Again, you should know how to get to your copy of Frederick Douglass's My Bondage and My Freedom in Canvas. So go ahead and grab that if you haven't gotten it already. And if you're using a paper copy of this book, I want you to open it up to Chapter 20, okay? Chapter 20. Now, there's a paragraph, you're going to have to go a little bit deep into that chapter, but there's a paragraph that starts out, "Such dear reader." I want you to find that, "Such dear reader." Now, if you're using the version that I gave you, that's on the right side of page 204, 204. It's a paragraph that starts out, "Such dear reader." Do you see where that is? "Such, dear reader, is a glance at the school which was mine. During the first 8 months of my stay at Baltimore, at the end of the 8 months, Master Hugh refused longer to allow me to remain with Mr. Gardner. The circumstance which led to his taking me away was a brutal outrage committed upon me by the white apprentices of the shipyard." Now, a couple things. The last time we got together, we saw that Master Hugh loaned Frederick Douglass out to a friend of the family, the Alds, right? And so he's not, unknown to do this. And he loaned him out to another set of friends in Baltimore, and they began to teach Frederick Douglass a trade. They began to make him into a skilled worker. Now, if you know anything about labor history, you can tell me that what an apprentice is somebody that was learning, somebody that was training to be a skilled worker. Well, think about it. If you teach the slaves how to be a carpenter or to be a shoemaker or to be a blacksmith or whatever it is that you're trying to teach them to do, then it's going to eliminate that job classification. It will destroy that job. And that's going to drive at the direct idea of what Frederick Douglass believes to be the victimization of non-slave holding white people. If you continue to go down, actually it's right in that same page, bottom right corner of 204. The fight was a desperate one, and I came out of it most shockingly mangled. I was cut and bruised in sundry places, and my left eye was nearly knocked out of its socket. The facts leading to this brutal outrage upon me illustrate a phase of slavery destined to become an important element in the overthrow of the slave system, and I may, therefore, state them with some minuteness. The phase is this: the conflict of slavery with the interests of the white mechanics and laborers of the South. In the country, this conflict is not so apparent, but in cities such as Baltimore, Richmond, New Orleans, Mobile, etc., it is seen pretty clearly. The slaveholders, with a craftiness peculiar to them, by encouraging the enmity of the poor, laboring white man against the blacks, succeeds in making the said white man almost as much of a slave as the black slave himself. The difference between the white slave and the black slave is this: the latter belongs to one slaveholder, and the former, as in the white slave, as he puts it, belongs to all the slaveholders collectively. The white slave has taken from him by indirection what the black slave has taken from him directly and without ceremony. Both are plundered and by the same plunderers. The slave is robbed by his master of all his earnings above what is required for his bare physical necessities, and the white man is robbed by the slave system of the just results of his labor because he is flung into competition with a class of laborers who work without wages. In other words, what slavery does for working class white people is it destroys economic opportunity. I mean, this was not lost on the mechanics, the workers in Baltimore. They understood where that one was going, and they understood that if Frederick Douglass learned how to do their jobs, it was going to put them out of a job. And the same thing, Douglass is actually predicting that one day the working class white population is going to be some of the biggest outspoken critics of the slave system anywhere in the country. They will, he believes, eventually call for its abolition. But for the time being, everybody, we need to ask ourselves, why are these white people going along with this? Why is it that they're very clearly, I don't know that I would say embracing, but certainly they're tolerating a system that works against their better economic self-interest? Why is it that they're doing that? That's the million-dollar question. So if you're the top right corner of 205, I'm in the same chapter, still in chapter 20, the competition and its injurious consequences will one day array the non-slave-holding white people of the slave states against the slave system and make them the most effective workers against the great evil. At present, the slaveholders blind them to this competition by keeping alive their prejudice against the slaves as men, not against them as slaves. He's driving at what you and I would call racism. We talked about John Punch. It probably seems like a lifetime ago, but if you think back to that video lecture entitled The Origins of the English North American Empire, I introduced you to this indentured servant. He's of African ancestry, but he's an indentured servant all the same, and his name is John Punch. He gets in trouble when he runs away from his Virginia plantation along with two other white indentured servants. But when they catch all three and they bring them back, even though the punishment is not the same for the two white indentures, John Punch is sentenced to servitude for life. And I told you at the time, what that's going to do is it's going to marry the condition of servitude, the condition of your service, to your race. If you happen to be white, your servitude status, your status as a worker, was seen as temporary. At least on paper, in theory, you could break out of that status as a worker, as being bossed around by another person, and one day, maybe you might own your own farm. One day, maybe you might be in control of your own workforce. Yeah, it was a dream, but at least that dream had some semblance of reality attached to it. After 1640, and certainly thereafter, that's not going to be a reality if you happen to have African ancestry within you. And it's going to be the foundations of American racism. That's why this year, 1640, is so important, so consequential when it comes to American history, because it's here that we're going to really kind of solidify our concepts of race and the components and the way that racism is going to work in the bigger, broader American society. So when he says they appeal to their pride, he's driving at the idea of racism. They appeal to their pride, often denouncing emancipation as tending to place the white man on equality with the Negroes. And by this, they succeed in drawing off of the minds of the poor whites from the real fact that by the rich slave master, they are already regarded as but a single remove from equality with the slave. A couple things there. Number one, slaves and poor working class white people had an awful lot in common. I am not saying that, the two were the same or that, they both had it as bad. Very obviously, clearly, and unequivocally, they did not. Okay? But at the same time, we gotta agree that it wasn't great to be working class white at this particular moment either. And so you would think that these two would have a lot in common and would join up to overthrow the slave system because it was working against their better economic interest. They don't, primarily, as we've said before, because the ruling class is able to appeal to their pride and basically racial solidarity. It's racism. But again, I need you to think about something. I need you to think about what these working class whites are doing in the bigger, broader context of our class. We had a video lecture not that long ago. It's been relatively around about this time. It's entitled North American Slavery. And in that video lecture, I introduced you to this concept of the slave patrol. It wasn't your fancy, well-to-do, slave-owning white people that were working in the slave patrol. It was your working class. And when I say working in the slave patrol, I don't mean like this was voluntary. It's Saturday. I don't have anything better to do. I think I'll go ahead and volunteer my time. What I mean is this was required. In states like, I guess I should say colonies like South Carolina, the black population actually outnumbered the white population. So, South Carolinians lived in fear day and night of a slave insurrection, and not for no good reason either. In any case, what the rich slave owners are doing is profiting from using not only the labor of the working class whites, but free labor. They're saying, listen, can't help it, wish I could do something about it, but this is a colonial, this is a local ordinance. This is the law. By law, you must serve in the slave patrol. If you think back to another video lecture, again, the one I was telling you about a little bit ago, the origins of the English North American Empire, remember Nathaniel Bacon? This wasn't lost on Nathaniel Bacon. It wasn't lost on him that these rich white people were gobbling up all the land, and in Virginia, it's land that leads to wealth or the movement of your status. To climb that socioeconomic ladder, you would have to have access to land. And when William Berkeley simply forbade that, said it was not going to happen, it leads to Bacon's Rebellion. And once again, the peace offering that's offered up during that time period involves this idea that we will stay out of your hair, we're going to keep government small, we're going to keep your taxes low, and in return for that, we're going to use more and more slave labor that's being drawn out of Africa. So you can see that the further and farther that slavery goes, that the more and more economic, financial opportunities are taken away from middle and working class Americans. If you stay with me long enough in this class, you're going to see this kind of evolve into a political philosophy, and that philosophy is going to serve as the bedrock of the platform of the Republican Party. We're a long ways away from that right now, but over the course of our class, you're going to see that the Republican Party is going to become the vehicle of anti-slavery. And in that respect, Douglass was well ahead of his time because he could see that the further and farther that slavery went, the more and more that this was going to rob working white people of economic opportunities.